We are live. This is my first time going live for my Substack called Beyond the Veil, and I'm so lucky today to have a good friend of mine. Everyone, I want to introduce you to Erica Dapkowitz. How are you
Hello,
doing
everyone.
today? How are things where you're at, Erica?
Hot.
Oh, she's in sunny Las Vegas, everybody.
Yeah, no, I've been back and forth between Southern California and Vegas over the last 3 weeks, and so it's no matter where I keep going, it just gets hot.
Oh, yeah. Nice and toasty for you, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm
All right.
staying indoors, unfortunately, most of the time.
Living in the AC.
Mm-hmm.
I got you. Well, we've got some hot topics today. This is my first time to invite someone on to do a live and basically tackle one topic in about 30 minutes or less. And before we do so, I'm just going to give some background about Erica. She is a film editor who's worked on movies like Lilo and Stitch, Mulan, Puss in Boots, The Croods, and many more. And she actually just wrapped on an upcoming release called The Twits, which is based on a book by Roald Dahl. She's also a musician, composer, and writer. And she even has a sci fi feature with a trans narrative under her belt. She's a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts, and Sciences, and she's worked with many famous artists over the years, including Lin-Manuel Miranda on the movie Vivo for Sony Pictures. That's quite a resume you have, Erica.
Thanks. It's just my day job.
you know, uh, Erica always amazes me because not only is she accomplished in her day job, but she just juggles so many things and is such a powerhouse creative. So, y'all, we're very lucky to have her on today. So, let's start the clock. I really wanted to kind of highlight what things are going on in the world right now. And for all of you who do follow my Substack, I just released an article last night about the Scrimetti decision, which came out last week from the Supreme Court. And Erica, I know you're not as familiar with this, but just to give people a rundown, it was essentially deciding on whether or not it was constitutional for Tennessee to ban certain medications, specifically only for trans youth, for gender transition or gender dysphoria, while allowing the same exact medications for non-transgender kids for other cases, other situations. And so the question that came up was, is this discrimination based on transgender status? And so in cases like this and in proving sex discrimination, you really have to look with a closer microscope or a deeper dive, and they call that heightened scrutiny. And there were certain things that qualify a class of people as deserving of heightened scrutiny. And as one might expect, the conservatives on the Supreme Court decided no, this does not require heightened scrutiny, while the liberals on the court dissented and said that this is very clear sex discrimination because you're allowing this treatment for one group of people and not for others. So, anyway, the fallout out of this is a question of equal rights, equal protections under the 14th Amendment. And and including Erica in this conversation, what I really wanted to do is um, try and be problem focused, or I'm sorry, solution focused. So, how can we provide solutions to the situation that we are dealing with today? And I want to incorporate your specialty and what you know, Erica, and just kind of take a moment to think, okay, well, this is the situation. What can we do? From because activism can look like so many things, right? And I would always venture to say that culture changes first through art, and you truly are an artist. So, what are your thoughts, for instance, about what the landscape is right now for trans representation in media versus 5 years ago?
Well, unfortunately, 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, in my opinion, trans the trans narrative in terms of like, you know, TV, film, was fairly positive. It was taking steps in a very, I thought, a very good direction. There's a documentary by Sam Feder called Disclosure
Mhm.
that you can find on Netflix that pretty much goes into detail about kind of trans stories that were kind of, you know, I guess for almost like 100 years. It goes back, you know, to Hollywood and stuff like that, and most of them were fairly negative. But we were
Yeah.
starting to see this big swing starting to happen. I would say in the 2010s, where you know you had people like Laverne Cox and the Wachowskis and Jamie Clayton, and just a lot of really positive, starting to have more positive representation with trans characters and narratives. So we weren't all like the crazy,
Mhm.
you know, psycho killers and Silence of the Lambs or the butt of jokes and Ace Ventura, you know, kind of a thing. And you know, our stories were starting to be taken more seriously, which was a great thing. Kind of like, you know, similar to how people started to get on board with the gay community, like in, you know, Will and Grace. So it was looking great until all of a sudden we started, you know, trans people started to be used as political pawns
Yeah.
by the right, and it's been a strategic thing that's been going on for a while now. Uh,
Yes.
I think, especially after it's actually the 10-year anniversary, right, for gay marriage.
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting that we're talking about that now because I do, in some ways, uh, believe that one of the direct results of that was the right going, okay, who are we going to go after next? Now that we lost this fight,
Yes.
and it just happened to be trans people, and you know, throughout the mid to end 2010s, they tried going after trans adults primarily, like with the bathroom bills throughout various states, and healthcare, but it all pretty much failed back then,
Yeah.
because there was so much more support back then, and especially from corporations who were threatening to pull out of states that were going to, you know, basically put these big bans on trans people. So that strategy didn't work, you know, back then. But unfortunately, in the last 5 years, the strategy that has worked is, I think, number one is to go after trans kids
Yeah.
because that ultimately, you know, that riles up, you know, parents,
Yeah.
and then and also the sports, you know, the sports stuff, the unfair, you know, to women, even though, you know, all before this, you know, most people didn't really seem to care about cis women's sports, you know, until there was like one or two trans people, you know, in
Yeah.
college sports. And then unfortunately, the third thing that I think that MAGA kind of Republicans, conservatives that have strategically done incredibly well, and I think it works into the whole Supreme Court thing, is they've really hijacked the narrative of who and what we are. They've
Yes.
spent hundreds of millions of dollars over
Yeah.
each year, and not just here, but also like in the UK.
Yeah.
Uh, and they have actually like taken complete control of our narrative,
Yeah.
and turned us into more of like, you know, this fear mongering group, the group, with no facts to really back it up, but they've kind of labeled us as like this whole thing's just an ideology.
Yeah.
And they kind of did a similar thing with gay people back in the day, where it was like, well, it's just a preference, and they can choose one way or the other. But they've done that with trans people, and I think, you know, listening to, you know, what's been happening with the Supreme Court, and especially like reading Amy Coney Barrett's, you know, words and stuff like that, like they've basically followed that narrative of like it's actually in the decision of like it's we're not a class of people to them because they've sold everyone on like it's an ideology,
Oh, you're right.
which is wrong. It's not correct. And you talk to most, you know, the healthcare people around the world and organizations and the peer reviewed studies that have been done for decades, and they'll say they're wrong.
Yeah. And that is an interesting piece is I think of for a lot of people who um, are not familiar with trans history, they think that because it just became part of their conscious awareness in the last 5, 10 years that it is something new. But the reality is, we go back centuries. And interestingly enough, Zachary Drucker is just releasing a documentary on HBO talking about April Ashley and Amanda Lear, who were what, in the 60s and 70s, trans women who were part of the carousel in Paris and went on to like disco fame and things like that. So that's just one small example of like what, 60, 50, 60 years ago, that we're talking. But you could go back, to Weimar Germany and see that there was actually an active trans community before World War II happened. Berlin was one of the most liberal parts of Europe. And, they had clinical research happening under Magnus Hirschfeld, and people were transitioning, and there was starting to be legal protections. People were undergoing gender affirming surgeries back then. We're as old as anybody else. We are certainly always stigmatized and not well understood because we are a tiny amount of the population. And so, what I think the right really grabbed onto is it's just so much easier to target us versus the gay community because we are that much smaller. And they get really invested in these emotional issues that you mentioned, the things about sports. And, what I find troubling is the hideous language that has emerged, Erica. It's not even trans women or trans girls in sports, it's like males, right? And I can tell you, as number one, a medical provider and a trans woman who transitioned 30 years ago, trans women are not physiologically equivalent to cisgender men. Okay. You and I can both speak about what happens to the human body on estrogen, regardless of genetic originalism.
Yeah.
And that's something people don't want to hear.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, like you said for us, and I'm going to support basically what you've said is, you know, we can all come with receipts, you know,
Yeah.
to every court case, every Senate hearing, House hearing, but at the end of the day, that's not like they're shutting us out. They don't want that. They're kind of like, the way it happened in Germany too is like, the LGBT community was one of the first communities to be basically eradicated. And it's just most people don't really realize that because we're so used to like hearing the awful stories of Auschwitz and and Jewish people, but LGBT people were the first ones wiped off the map, and we're
Okay.
kind of seeing similarities happening here. And a part of that is to also just completely squelch the trans people's stories as well. So it's like they're banning books. They're like I think even the Supreme Court today said that parents have the right to make sure that their children don't read LGBT content. And so, yeah, there is a constant effort to pivot and make people think that we're this when we're really not. And then if as long as like they strip away our voices, whether it's through books, whether it's through podcasts, whether it's through TV shows or movies or documentaries, that's what they're doing. And they're succeeding because I actually work in the industry and I've actually seen it firsthand happening where they're putting so much pressure on these companies to basically like stop making LGBT content, especially trans content. And some of these really big name companies are pulling their like if stuff's been in development, it's been thrown in the trash. If something was even made and was supposed to air, on a streaming show and stuff like that, they've cut it out or they have just completely taken the episode out altogether.
Yeah, very troubling times. And so, knowing that this is the situation and knowing that we want to be solution oriented with our approach, what are your thoughts about what we can do in order to counter this? I mean, it's really hard without those corporate dollars, right? And
Yeah.
without corporate support. But at the end of the day, the only thing that corporations really honor is the color green.
Yeah, and that's the sad part about it. What a lot of the meetings that I'm in personally with executives, you often hear the term the four quadrants.
Okay.
It always uses a an example of like we need to appeal to the four quadrants
Mm,
of the consumers. And an interesting story is that there's a great animated movie called Nimona. I don't know if you've heard about it,
no.
but it was originally written as a graphic novel by N.D. Stevenson, who's also trans.
Okay.
And so the main character Nimona is basically trans, like it's trans allegory. And An animated film came out that Netflix released a couple years ago, and it was actually nominated for Best Animated Picture of the Year for an Oscar. And I love the film; it's a great film. But it had and I know some of the filmmakers on it. They struggled so hard to get that movie made. I think they initially were making it over at Blue Sky Animation, who did the Ice Age movies in
Mhm.
Rio, and then Disney bought um, Blue Sky. And I think they were halfway through making Nimona, and then Disney like saw the content that was in Nimona. It was like, yeah, we can't release this. We can't take that chance because the content's going to be too controversial for us. So the filmmakers actually took it and got actually more financing from smaller production companies, finished the film, and had Netflix release it. So it was great. It came out a couple years ago. Really good representation, great story, great characters. Was nominated, but I've been told that as of today, that movie would never be made or be released because of what's going on. And I personally have known of other projects that were in the pipeline that had had a trans character in it and were squashed specifically because of what's going on.
Yeah, and so would you say therefore that the onus is on more independent creators to get their content out there in whatever way they can? Or
I think as long as we have the ability to continue to showcase trans stories through whatever medium we can, we got to try, right? And that's kind of the beauty of today's age, is that so many of us, those who don't even really have a lot of kind of story skills or filmmaking skills, you can still create like really good content that you can share with the world.
yes, yeah,
Really, via whether it's YouTube or like an indie streaming service. There's so many ways, even now, like look how you and I are talking now on Substack. So
yeah,
that really is, as long as like we have the ability to continue to let everyone out there know that like, hey, we exist. We're still here, and we are living positive lives, and and creating wonderful stories with new and interesting characters. I say we don't stop if we can keep doing it.
we
Uh,
can't stop. It's
right.
survival. And just jumping off of that, what do you think are the role and need for allies in this moment? Because again, we're 1% of the population. And for so
Yeah.
many of us, we're confronting, economic hardship of just trying to survive because of
Yeah.
discrimination or limited choices. And so I'm really struggling with like, how do I push my allies around me to like take up the banner or something? Because everybody can do something.
Yeah. I think unfortunately we're walking on eggshells right now. I'm
Yeah,
just going to be honest. You know,
sure.
Again, 5, 10 years ago, I would say most of the people that were in my circle that were cis people were highly supportive, publicly supportive. And this included even some of the, I pretty much every studio I worked for,
Yeah.
every filmmaker that I worked with. And I think, unfortunately, the tactics of bullying, of you know, kind of going after people who seem to support, and making examples of them, like Bud Light's a great example.
Yeah.
Uh, when they kind of, I think wasn't it just like an internet, like 30-second clip of Dylan Mulvaney,
Tiny,
just
tiny.
drinking a Bud and stuff like that. And like, I had never seen a backlash like that ever. And then, of course, that made Bud Light retreat. And that's the hard part here, is we're walking on eggshells because like, whether it's a corporation or whether it's even people we know, um, right now Trump and the conservatives and the Republican Party are just flooding us like crazy with all kinds of just crap, and it's on purpose. This is, I mean, it's all strategic. So at the end of the day, like most of the cis people I talk to, they're worrying about like other things.
True.
Like they're worrying about all these things that are going on, like the economy, the food prices, gas,
Ice.
tariffs,
Yeah.
immigrants, ICE.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just courts, Supreme Court, like rights being taken away. Like, and then at the end of the day, like, again, because we only represent 1%, even at that, of the population, we're like a small little piece of the pie of like what everyone else is dealing with. And I often say to everybody, when I think you even asked me, like, how are you doing? And I said, I'm surviving. Most people I talk to, even non-trans people, they're kind of doing the same thing. And
Right.
we're not necessarily on their minds, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think, for me, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to do whatever I can to reach out to friends and family and just trying to like do what I can to meet up with them and hang out and, have a coffee, go to a park, go to a movie, like do whatever you can to to kind of like let everybody know like we're here for them, but also like we would like you to be there for us
So
at
you're
the same
talking
time.
about building community really and leaning into community as an antidote and as a strength in this moment.
Yeah, because I have found that a lot of support comes from when like people just like you as a person, no matter who you are or what skin color you have or what gender you are.
Yeah.
And I think again, the Republicans want to control our narrative, so they want to completely strip any positive stories out there and just create all this fear mongering and negative stuff. And the people who don't know us, don't know a trans person, they're believing it.
Yep.
So what can we do about it? Well, I mean, let's just try to like keep being a positive, role model,
Yeah.
not just for our cis peers, um, and try to tell positive stories, but also to like have the trans youth, have their backs and also just look up to us to like don't stop fighting, don't stop telling stories, don't stop being a good role model for others. Because I know for me, like I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have role models and people that I could look up to.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that is an incredibly good point. Not only role models, but possibility models to know what is possible. And jumping off what you just said about trans youth, what would be your advice to youth who are trans right now in this moment and that they're getting the heat even worse than us? And I know, for instance, I dove into this a little bit in my article. I knew what it was like to be aware and trans as a young person and to confront like going through the wrong puberty and how like mortifying that is. And I think it's almost worse in this instance, Erica, where youth have had this opportunity to access care, and for almost half the country it might be ripped away now.
Mhm.
And who's to say if it might not um be ripped away everywhere, because
Yeah.
even Children's Hospital of LA recently closed its program for transgender youth.
Yeah. And I know actually, unfortunately, I know several parents who had kids that were going there and are just devastated with what's going on. Because again, just because of the pressure, whether it's the hospitals or any kind of corporation, it's you can see it. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, yeah. Part
Well,
of
I mean,
this.
in terms of advice, first and foremost, it- every parent that has a trans child that I know, and trust me, there's a lot of parents that reach out to me,
I can
like
imagine.
are constantly asking me questions and talking to me and looking for support. The first thing I say to them is thank you so much, and I want to give them a hug because so many parents tend to kind of lose their inner circles for the love of their children. And most people don't seem to care and most people don't seem to be aware. So my first thing is like, look, like, I want to acknowledge the strength but also the pain that you're probably going through, because your child needs you. And God, like I can't even imagine being a child right now, suffering with gender dysphoria and going through like where, because even right now I feel like my country's abandoning me, and I've given everything to this place, all my life. And it's like, this is the way you're going to repay us, kind of a thing. Like, what did we do? Like, wait, what? So, and again, I'm an adult. I can comprehend most of what's going on. A child usually can't, and it's like you're always trying to protect, your children from the monsters. I mean, look, I create animated stories all the time with villains and monsters, that go after the innocent. And again, probably 99% of the people in this country will watch those movies and go, "Yeah, down with the villain, down with the monster, down with blah blah blah." But right now it seems like half the country, they are villains and monsters, in those stories in a
Well, they're
way.
they're co-signing, right? I mean,
Yeah,
even inaction is permission, right?
yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's got to be a family unit, a strong family unit, not just for a child can only do so much. Like it's got to the parents. My heart goes out to parents of trans children and trying to navigate what's going on. I think for a while there, we had talked about the idea of like having to move, from a red state to a blue state. I've known many trans parents that live in Texas and in Florida and like some of the worst of the worst states. And they're just devastated because they spent their whole lives there and they have to move, which is not always easy, right? It's like not everybody can economically just pick up and go.
Yeah,
And the hope, obviously, is that the blue states will remain safer than the red states, but there's no guarantee of that. So then you have to start looking like what countries, would be safer, for my family and my loved ones there. And I think
yeah,
it needs to be a constant dialogue between the parent and the child. And the
yeah,
parent like really reassuring the child like, I I've got you.
yeah.
I've got
No,
you.
those are all really incredible, solid things that you're sharing, and thank you for that perspective also, Erica, about the struggle that the parents of trans kids go through and how isolating it can be because so many people, A, don't understand, and B, don't really want to understand. um, to springboard on that, maybe I could just share for trans kids, like, it is devastating what is happening. And yes, the bad guys are right next door in some cases. And it feels like the world is going to collapse if you have any sort of interruption to the care that you may be receiving or about to receive. And what I can point out is that both you and I are examples that, maybe transition later isn't perfect. It may be more complicated, but it is possible. I mean, I transitioned just after puberty. You did a little bit later in life, Erica. And, you know, we have endured and we have survived all of these things. And that's what we have to lean into, right? Is that this is one snapshot in time. God willing, this administration will only be another 3.5 years, I'm hoping. But yeah, there's really very real world damage that's being done in this moment, not only to our community, but to a lot of marginalized communities here and across the world. And what I can point out is like things like this aren't just isolated to the United States. We're exporting transphobia like, it's some great product. There's things happening in England. I mean, there's murmurs of all of this right wing obsession everywhere.
Which
And so
does beg the question, why are they so obsessed with what's between our like there's almost a bit there really is an unhealthy obsession with the anti-trans movement. There really is. Like like I do question their obsession of yeah.
every accusation is an admission, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
If you're thinking about us this much, I would love to see your feed on your laptop of what you are looking at when no one's looking.
Yeah,
because typically those are the people who fetishize or obsessed or maybe even trans themselves. So I don't know, people. It seems a little weird. Just
it
gonna
does
say.
seem very weird.
Yeah. um, in closing, I don't want to take too much of your time, Erica. I wondered if you could shamelessly promote yourself a little bit, tell people where they can find you, and to learn more about you if you'd like.
Yeah, I have an Instagram account, Miss Mako Dap. And I have a band. We just released an album last month. The name's Imaginarius with an I. You can find us on like most streaming services like Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, and stuff like that. Again, I'm a film editor during the day, and usually work mostly on big animated movies. And so, like you had said, Sarah, I literally just finished the Twits for a Netflix animation. It's supposed to come out in October.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure a trailer at some point should be dropping at least in the next month or so. But yeah, it's a really fun movie. It's great. In actuality, it's got a really good theme to it that most people should really like pay attention to these days, especially when it comes to like empathy.
Yeah, I love that, and who does not love Roald Dahl, who had any part of his books in their childhood? This will be a really special thing, so,
Yeah.
yeah, really excited, about that, and everyone please follow Erica, she's a powerhouse, not only talented in her day job, but just prolific in everything that she does, and an incredible friend who jumped on as I muddled through this first live, and so I hope to do more of these for all of you and just keep the conversation going. And I hope you all take care of yourselves. And until next time, don't believe what you hear on the news. Please remember to take a look beyond the veil. Lots of love, everyone. Thanks, Erica.
Bye.